Good Wednesday morning. Again, I stay with Romans. It's a great letter. Well, it's very important. He was the great apostle to the Romans. Where would the church be without him? See? Not only was he a genius, but his apostolic work in going to Rome and the Gentiles. He turned the church, he created, in a sense, the universal church, the global community. That it isn't the law, but Christ that unites us, is saying. Well, I'll show it to you. He says, this is again Romans chapter 13. He says, owe nothing to anyone except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. See? The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not kill, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other commandments there may be, look, he's so dismissive, are summed up in this saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no evil to the neighbor, as love is the fulfillment of the law. That is the genius of St. Paul, that we are not called to servile obedience or rule-keeping. We are called to the intimacy of love itself. See, love one another. See? So I have loved you. Love is the fulfillment of the law, isn't it? He's right, even in the practical level. If you love somebody, you're not going to hurt them. You're not going to do any of those negatives, those negatives that you saw. You shall not kill. Why would you kill your friend, somebody you love? Why would you steal from them? You see, love covers it all. You don't need to know the other commandments. You don't even have to know them, because you're never going to do them, not to someone you love. And what Christ tells us is, see, he said, love does no evil to one's neighbor, but then he universalizes it, he globalizes it. Who's your neighbor? Remember that? Then it's the story of the Good Samaritan. Everyone's your neighbor. You do no harm to anyone. No one. Everyone. Everyone is our neighbor, and everyone is to be loved. See, we have no enemies. We have no enemies. Christianity, in a profound sense, is the hope of humanity itself, in my view, because it radicalizes. At the very root of our existence is the gospel message that all are neighbors. We are all neighbor to each other. We are all brothers and sisters to each other. And hence, we are called to love and forgive and heal, as you would heal a family that is suffering from within. See? I learned that lesson at home. Anybody listening to these things is going to know. They think of you when there's a rift in your family. What do? You heal it. You heal it. Well, there's a rift in the family of humankind. Has been since Adam and Eve, and Christ calls us to heal the rift, not through obedience to rules, but to the intimacy of love itself. To love even your enemies. Remember that? It's a Good Samaritan. See that. And we have to be the Good Samaritan to each other in the world. Yes, that's the truth. I think that's why Christianity, I think, is the hope of humanity, apart from eternity now, because it is a religion of intimacy, that we are called to the intimacy of love for everyone. Not bloodlines, not nationality, not ethnicity or locality, but everyone. We share in the commonality of life itself, and the life is the life of Christ. I mean that. There are no enemies. We are only friends together. I think of that as a verb, being friends together, being neighbors together. We look out for each other. You see that. I know if I beat this stuff to death, I'm sorry. It's just thoughts that come to me early in the morning as I make these videos, and I think of the neighborhood, the kids I grew up with. I mean this too. I learned as much from the neighborhood as I learned from anything I ever studied, because I learned what it was to be a neighbor. And what it was to be a neighbor was you looked out for each other on the city block, on your street. And even if you didn't like each other especially, you still were in some ways connected, and hence you knew the difference between a person who was a member of the street, in other words, your neighbor, or was a stranger. And I remember this, I've said this to you before, you know that. When somebody was on the street that didn't belong there, they'd have 100 set of eyes on them. They wouldn't do anything, but they're watching. On the other hand, you always knew that no one was going to bother you. No violence was allowed on our street. And there never was. We were perfect, forget about it. It was not even close. When I look back, I saw, now looking as an adult, as an old man, I look back and I saw things that were really, in a sense, family abusive. There was alcoholism all over the place. And spousal abuse. Yeah, there was. Looking back. Yeah, looking back. There was a lot of bad stuff. As one person put it, today that person would go to jail for child abuse. Yeah, there was some really bad stuff. I mean it. Today, for sure. You know the wicked stepmother that was in our neighborhood? Today she'd go to jail, and she should. Then we didn't look the other way, but we tried not to notice. And we looked out for each other. Yeah, we did. I can't explain to you how to live it, but being a neighbor meant you look out for each other. And the enemy was not within. The enemy was the stranger. Real enemy? No. But the non-neighbor, you see. In a sense, that's what Christ is saying, except that now it isn't the members of your street. It's all of humanity itself, and you have to look out for them. Perfect? No. No. But beloved by God? Yes. And called to redemption? Yes. And now I would say looking out for each other would mean truly to look out for each other, even to stop the abuse. Today, as one of my neighbors put it, the wicked stepmother would have gone to prison. This was real abuse, physical abuse, yeah. Beatings, yeah. Yeah. I'm not justifying anything. But I'm grateful that I grew up in a neighborhood that was real, and that it was a neighborhood. And out of that, I've learned what it is to be a neighbor. I saw it in the order. I see it in the parish. I see it in the world of my students. I know what it is to be a neighbor because I lived as a neighbor with neighbors. Perfect? No. Flawed to the hilt, but also good. At least we looked out for each other. That's the truth. My grandmother was the best. She sat in the window. She sat upstairs in the second floor, and she looked out the window, and she knew everybody on the street. And there was nobody could walk on that street that didn't belong that she didn't notice. And she wasn't alone. I think the old ladies the old grandmothers on the street were the guardians. You know, who's this guy? Who's this guy? What are you doing here? You see? Yeah. Yeah, that's the truth. That's the truth. We were neighbors to each other, and Christ calls us to be neighbors to each other. Not to necessarily like each other. Not everybody liked each other on the street, but to look out for each other, to love one another, take care of each other, heal the rifts if you can. That's the truth. I learned so much from Ward Street in New Haven. I learned more of, I think, in that experience. I understand what it is to be a neighbor because I lived in a neighborhood. That's the truth. Whether it's in the order, but that was the street. But I saw it in the order. I see it in the parish. What it is to be a neighbor, to look out for each other.